A human touch to genocide commemoration first. Hollywood star Joe Manganiello sits down with the public radio to tell in chilling detail the story of his family, his Armenian great-grandmother's survival during genocide. Pragmatic politics will follow. Joe, thank you for this opportunity.
Sure. It's nice to be here.
Everyone knows you, but not everyone knows that you are a great-grandson of a genocide survivor. What's your story?
My great-grandmother survived the Armenian genocide. She was from Harput, which is referred to as the slaughterhouse province. Things were very, very bad there. It was part of Western Armenia, which is now central Turkey, and doesn't exist on a map. Where she was born and raised was completely destroyed, and her husband was murdered, and 8 of her children were murdered in front of her. She was shot, left for dead, didn't die, and her 9th child, an infant, was left to starve to death in the crib, and she made her escape past the death marches with the baby, this 9th child, strapped to her back, and she swam the Euphrates River to safety. When she reached the other side, the baby had drowned, so she lost her 9th child. And she lived in a cave with other refugees, and as the story goes, she then wound up working in the service of a German soldier who was stationed in the Ottoman Empire during World War I. The Turks worship German military might, so a lot of German officers were welcomed down to the Ottoman Empire during the war, and one of them happened to be my great-grandfather. My great-grandmother Terviz Durakshan was impregnated by this German and then was left to give birth to the baby, my grandmother, on her own. And so she gave birth to a half-German, half-Armenian child that was my grandmother. So my grandmother was born in Constantinople at the end of World War I, and then my great-grandmother wrote a letter asking for help. She said that she was in a camp and that she had this baby and was not in a good way, and so she sent this letter out. She had 3 sisters, and sent this letter out in an Armenian publication asking for help, and one of the sisters was married to a man in America, and they sent money to her and got her on a boat, and she left Constantinople and came to Ellis Island, and then was brought up to Worcester, Massachusetts, and so she joined the community there and was married off to an Armenian man in Worcester, Massachusetts, and that's where she lived. Another sad note to the story is that 10th baby, my grandmother, named Sirarpi, died very young of autoimmune conditions. She had a host of autoimmune conditions, and she died of complications involving lupus. She had a horrible skin condition, and died shortly after my mother was born. And so it's almost like she only lived long enough to give birth to my mother, and then died of autoimmune conditions, which we now know are largely in part to generational trauma. So the echoes of the Armenian genocide then killed my grandmother 40 years later, and rattle around and echo through that whole side of my family. So what was done to the Armenians under the veil of World War I still echoes around today. And so I'm actually on the board of a biosciences genetics laboratory, and some of their research is pointing towards epigenetics and the passing on of generational trauma.
Transitioning from human tragedy to politics on the ground, does Joe Manganiello, the descendant of a genocide survivor, have faith in the political processes of normalization? What a painful story of generational trauma, which explains why you relate to and align with the Armenian cause. What's your perspective on the so-called peace process, on the Armenian authorities' efforts to establish peace, to reconcile with Turkey? Because all of these political processes stem from a painful past that has been the past of your family as well.
Well, I want to say first and foremost, as Armenians, we all know where our ancestors went. There's no question. So the idea of denying the genocide is ridiculous. The question then becomes healing without that recognition. You know, I think that a lot of Armenians, especially the previous generation, there was a state of suspended healing upon having that kind of recognition from Turkey, from other nations. I believe that, you know, the Armenians have healed and will continue to heal without that recognition. We know where they went. It doesn't matter anymore. With that said, it's hard. It's hard to live in a world where what happens in Artsakh happens. And it's hard to reconcile with that. And then, furthermore, you talk about peace. You talk about, you know, the current White House's talks of brokering peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But in order to do that, the 23 hostages have to be released, or more. I mean, there's question that there's a lot more, but. You can't have peace when you still have these hostages being held without due process, and so, you know, as we all know, whenever crimes against humanity are committed and punishment isn't carried out, it sends a signal to other people that this can happen again. I mean, everybody knows the 1939 Hitler quote a week before Germany invaded Poland, which was to the effect, translated, that no one thinks about the annihilation of the Armenians anymore. You know, the Turkish government was not punished after World War I, and so therefore, I think a lot of the Nazi worldview was born out of the lack of punishment in a global sense. And then, of course, that then leads to assassination attempts, you know, Operation Nemesis, which is chaos. And so, you know, I'm anti-war. I would like to find ways for people to coexist. I mean, it's so ridiculous when you really think that we live in a world where people live, what, 70, 80 years? And you're going to spend it fighting over really arbitrary reasons. I mean, is this really over Christian, Muslim? It's over religious beliefs? I mean, really? It's finding a way to coexist, and especially people of that, the people of the Near East. I mean, there's a reason why the genetic testing like a 23andMe or an Ancestry.com that's so popular in the United States, there's a reason why Turkeys won't allow that. It's because the people of that region are going to realize that they're all made of the same gene. They're born of the same genes. And so, you know, it's a lot of the same people fighting over ridiculous things that have nothing to do with the human experience when you really boil it down.
By the 110th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, a new element of Armenian foreign policy has emerged. While the diaspora, the Armenian Assembly in this case, brings together influentials to reminisce over the historic past, a highly criticized statement by Armenia's Prime Minister comes to the mind. Armenians should, quote, overcome the genocide trauma, unquote. Translation from the language of politics. This was a signal to Turkey that genocide recognition is no longer a foreign policy priority. Economic expediency is. Open borders with Ankara will outweigh historic injustice. Your alignment with these painful topics helps shed light into what's happening. You know that the Armenian authorities are trying to leave the past behind and to move towards security. But this takes political will on both sides. And we see that Baku detracted retracted from the possibility of a peace agreement, what would your call be to the American authorities, to the American nation, to the international community to help bring peace to pass in South Caucasus?
Well, I know that there has been talk about protecting persecuted Christians. So, I mean, from a strictly, religious standpoint, there are persecuted Christians out there who are not being defended. And over oil resources, I would call upon our current government to do the right thing. How can you broker peace between these nations when completely undue legal process is being inflicted upon these hostages? So how can you allow people to commit war crimes wantonly and then send a message to other nations that they can just follow suit? So, it's not just about the genocide anymore or recognition. I mean, even though, yes, of course, that has to do with, generational trauma issues, but I think that's more of like a spiritual sense now. I think right now, currently, it's about sending this message to the Near East that it won't be tolerated. That type of behavior won't be tolerated, and it has to be given by a country, by a government that has power over Azerbaijan.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there healing without recognition? This is the question that lies at the core of Armenia-Turkey reconciliation attempts.